All right, today we're going to unpack the worldview of Brigitte Gabriel. Now, she's a pretty prominent and, let's be honest, a very controversial voice, especially in the whole debate around Islam and the West. And as you'll see, her entire perspective is really shaped by this incredible story of survival. So, in this explainer, we're going to break down the core arguments she makes in her speeches, and you'll find they all go back to her experiences during the Lebanese Civil War. She often starts with this quote, and really, it's the cornerstone of her entire message. What starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. It's a pretty stark warning, right? Basically, she's saying that what she sees as a threat to one group is, in her view, a threat to everybody. She argues that this isn't some isolated problem, but a global issue that she believes affects the entire Western world. So, you might be wondering, where does she get the authority to make such a huge claim? Well, for her, the answer is simple. It's her personal story. She doesn't just present her life as some kind of backdrop. No, for her, it is the primary evidence. She's positioning herself as a first-hand witness to the very conflict she's describing. She puts it like this: my 9/11 happened to me in 1975. Think about that for a second. She's taking this date that's burned into our collective memory and reframing it to make a really powerful point. For her, the defining moment wasn't September 11, 2001. It was 1975. She was just 10 years old, living in what she describes as a majority Christian Lebanon, when she says radical Islamists blew up her home. And that event, well, that was just the beginning of a truly harrowing ordeal. I mean, her life was just shattered. For the next 7 years, she says she lived in this tiny 8 by 10-foot underground bomb shelter. Just try to picture that. She describes this life of constant fear. No electricity, no running water. We're just getting food meant crawling out from the shelter literally under the threat of sniper fire. It's an absolutely brutal story. And this experience led her to one core conclusion. As she puts it, I learned, since I was a 10-year-old little girl, that I am wanted dead simply because I was born into the Christian faith. So for her, this wasn't political, this wasn't territorial. She came to believe that the conflict was fundamentally religious, and that her Christian identity was the one and only reason she was a target. And you really have to understand this, because this belief, it becomes the absolute bedrock for everything else she argues. Okay, so from that deeply personal traumatic experience, Gabriel then zooms way out. She builds this sweeping historical narrative. Her argument is that what happened to her in Lebanon wasn't some isolated, one-off event. Nope. She sees it as just one piece of a 1,400-year-long pattern of conflict. And for her, it's a massive warning from history that she believes the West is just completely ignoring. So how does she make this historical case? Well, the core of her argument is this idea that Islamic history is split into two distinct phases. She says that in the beginning, the Meccan phase, Islam was a peaceful, spiritual movement. But, she claims, everything changed after the Prophet Muhammad was rejected by the Jewish tribes of Medina. That's when, in her telling, it transformed into a political and military force, the Medinan phase. And she says you can see this shift right in the Quran, in what she describes as its later, more violent verses. She then brings up this concept called jizya. Now, this was a tax that non-Muslims, known as dhimmis, had to pay while living under Islamic rule. But in her interpretation, this was not just a tax. She sees it as a tool of subjugation, something specifically designed to make Christians and Jews second-class citizens. So this timeline kind of maps out her whole historical narrative. She draws this direct line, starting in the 600s, with what she calls the militarization of Islam. Then she points to the Crusades, which she reframes as a defensive action by Christians. She marks 1683, a 9/11 in her telling, as the defeat at the gates of Vienna, which started the Islamic Empire's decline. This all leads to 1924, when the caliphate was officially ended. And then just 4 years later, the Muslim Brotherhood is founded in Egypt, with what she claims is one single goal: to bring back that global caliphate, basically a single Islamic state to rule over all Muslims. And to really hammer home the human cost of this history, she puts a number on it. And it's a staggering one. She claims that 270 million people were killed during the 1400-year rule of the Islamic Caliphate. Now, that's obviously a hugely controversial figure, but it's absolutely central to her argument about the historical stakes of the conflict she's describing. Okay, so this is where her whole historical narrative collides with the present day. She argues that this ambition for a global caliphate isn't just some dusty old relic of the past. She says it's a clear and present danger. And her evidence for this? An alleged master plan for the West, a secret strategy she's dubbed civilization jihad. And here it is. This is what Gabriel presents as the smoking gun. It's a quote from a 1991 Muslim Brotherhood document she says was discovered by the FBI. It reads, quote, "A kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house." She really highlights this passage to argue that the plan isn't about some big external invasion. It's about a quiet, stealthy, internal demolition of Western society. So how exactly would this grand jihad work? Well, Gabriel lays out a multi-step plan for subversion. We're not talking about a war fought with bombs and bullets here. According to her, it's a war fought with laws, with culture, with our own institutions. The strategy, she claims, is to literally turn the West's greatest strengths, our freedoms, our civil rights laws, our tolerance, and use them as weapons against us. And she puts a very specific number on this whole operation. The document, she claims, actually lists 29 different organizations in North America. And in her view, these aren't just harmless community groups. She argues they are front organizations with a single, sinister purpose: to carry out this plan of civilization jihad from within. So all of this brings us to her final urgent message. Her diagnosis for the West is, to put it mildly, pretty grim. And her proposed treatment is just as radical. She frames the whole situation as a medical emergency, like a battle against a fast-spreading cancer that requires immediate and, decisive action. And this cancer analogy is really at the heart of her warning. She makes a stark comparison. For Europe, she says, it's already too late. It's at stage 4 cancer, terminal, beyond saving. But for America, she believes there's still a chance. She says America is at stage 2. Yeah, the situation is critical, but there's still time to operate and, in her words, save our country. Okay, so what does this operation actually entail? Well, her proposed solutions are a mix of some pretty hardline policies and a major cultural shift. We're talking about things like restricting immigration from certain countries, bolstering intelligence services, and prosecuting and expelling criminals. But also, she calls for pressuring politicians for tougher security and, in her famous phrase, throwing political correctness in the garbage. And it probably goes without saying, these are all incredibly controversial proposals. So there you have it. That's the worldview of Brigitte Gabriel in a nutshell. It's a perspective built on a foundation of intense personal trauma, a very specific interpretation of history, and the stark warning about a civilization jihad. And so we'll leave you with the central question that her entire argument really forces you to ask. Is the West, as she claims, actually facing a civilization jihad from within?